Expired.
Thank you, Chairwoman Johnson. I'll now recognize Ranking Member Lucas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Dr. Jacobs, the Weather Research and Forecasting Innovation Act of 2017, which I sponsored along with many of my colleagues here today, prioritized commercial weather data to improve our forecast skills. I understand NOAA is continuing the commercial weather data pilot program. Could you discuss with us for a bit what is the status of the program, and does NOAA plan to buy this data after it's tested?
Yes, so thank you very much for the Weather Research and Forecast Innovation Act, as well as the NIDIS reauthorization. The commercial, the weather data pilot program, what we've learned through testing is that the GPSRO data that we were collecting adds value. We haven't quantified exactly how much, but we know that it adds enough value to make sense to enter into a contract to acquire the data. So we'll be transitioning that from a pilot program to an actual data acquisition program. The pilot program will still exist, and we're using that to explore space-based data sets beyond GPSRO, for example, possibly hyperspectral sounders or instruments like that.
Doctor, during my tour of the University of Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, I heard from several of my constituents that we are potentially on the cusp of a breakthrough in our ability to forecast short and long-term weather. And I know this is a topic my colleagues have discussed also, but do you agree with this sentiment? And what steps can this committee take to help assist NOAA and the private partners in this endeavor?
We are very close to making some major leaps forward. The primary difference between us and the European Center, which is the modeling agency that we're always compared to, is the data assimilation of the model. So while I just spoke earlier on the upgrade to the dynamic core, we haven't upgraded the data assimilation system yet. We're expecting that is probably 1.5 to 2 years away, but we have to upgrade a lot of the infrastructure and architecture around the software, including the dynamic core, before we upgrade the data assimilation system. That's where I think you're going to see the biggest leap forward in improvement in forecast skill. In addition to that, transitioning all of the code to cloud-based architecture. One of the biggest hurdles in harnessing external collaborator development is they don't have login credentials to our machines because of various security requirements. So the best way to solve the problem was to move the model code to a compute architecture that they had access to external to NOAA. And I think once that transition is finished, you'll see development rapidly occur.
Thank you, Doctor. One last question. And thinking about the chairwoman's questions about the spectrum and frequency. This committee has a long history of supporting investments in NOAA's satellite systems. If the FCC auctions spectrum that limits the utility of these systems is worth, if the FCC is going to auction off parts of the spectrum that affect the utility systems, is it worth continuing to fund these billion-dollar satellites, Doctor?
Well, ultimately we'll have to wait until the final number is decided on the out-of-bounds emissions limits, and then we can actually use that number to determine how much of the data will be impacted. And once we determine how much data is impacted, then we can do an actual assessment on whether or not we can meet the mission requirements. If it's impacted such that we can't meet the mission requirements, then it would be prudent to rethink the investments in future polar orbiting satellites.
And that would be a shame if we lost all those billions of dollars in investment, and that I would hope the other areas of the federal government are paying as close attention to this issue as you are, Doctor. Thank you very much. Yield back the balance of my time, Chairwoman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lucas. I will now recognize